Thank you for the characteristics of a good research hypothesis. It should be conceptually clear, should be objective. Objective data collection, research activity free from researcher value judgment is very important. Should be specific, relevant. It should be consistent with existing body of theories and research findings. Should be feasible and cost effective. And it should have a profound effect on the research variables which are being taken up for discussion. So what are the sources of hypothesis? So most important source are the theoretical or the conceptual frameworks that are drawn up for that particular study. Of course, another important source is previous research, academic literature, and of course, real life experiences. What are the types of hypothesis? Can be a simple hypothesis or a complex hypothesis. Simple hypothesis initially deals with two variables. Complex hypothesis takes into consideration multiple variables. It can be associative hypothesis or causal hypothesis, can be directional or non-directional hypothesis, and of course the null and the research hypothesis. The null hypothesis or the statistical hypothesis is very important because it states that there is no relationship between the independent and the dependent variables, and the p-value basically either supports or refutes this null hypothesis. Now, the very concept of research hypothesis has come under criticism. Some researchers are of the opinion that it has no positive contribution. It may bias the research and predetermine the outcome. Qualitative researchers also claim that hypothesis should result from investigation, not the other way around. Now coming to the second part, that is the data collection. So if we do not store the data properly, analyze the data properly, we will be like the 6 blind men touching different parts of the elephant. Someone touching the tail thought it to be a rope, someone touching the trunk thought it to be a wall, and so on and so forth. So first, plan out your data collection. Look at the objectives and the scope of the study, the research question, the research hypothesis. What sources of information will you be relying on? The quantitative expression, the measurements and the scales that you're going to use, the techniques of data collection, the unit of collection. Now, if we look at the data collection plan, so basically the flowchart is something like identify the types of data, the research question, the research hypothesis, which goes on to the types of measurements and the variables that you are going to apply. Then comes the instruments, the scales and methods that you are going to use, and at this particular juncture, at this particular step, the concept of the written consent, the informed consent comes in. So once this is done, then we move on to the pilot testing phase. Now based on the results of the pilot testing phase, either we might have to revise and go back to the previous step, that is the instruments, the scales and methods step, or we can go ahead to the next step, that is data collection forms, preparing them, operational procedures, budget, etc., and finally the implementation of the data collection plan. So what are the sources of data collection? Could be internal sources, external sources. External sources could be primary data or secondary data. Primary data, first-hand data, is obviously more reliable, authentic, because it's not been published anywhere and it's got a higher validity than secondary data. Demerits, of course, it's more time consuming to obtain primary data, cost would be higher, sometimes feedback might be inaccurate, and of course we have to put in a lot of effort to collect primary data. So what are the primary data collection methods? Observation, interview, questionnaire, and schedules. So observation. Observation is something we are not interviewing the respondents here. It's an expensive model. The information provided is very limited and it is not suitable in cases where large samples are concerned. So observation can be structured or unstructured. Structured as in where you're carefully defining the units to be observed and the style of recording the observed information. And it is useful mainly for descriptive research. Unstructured observations are more used in the exploratory researches. Observation can be participant or non-participant observation. Participant observation is if the observer observes by making himself more or less a member of the group he is observing, so that he can experience what the members of the group experience. And then the other way around is the non-participant observation, where the presence of the observer may be unknown to the people he or she is observing. Can be controlled or uncontrolled observation. If the observation takes place in the natural setting, it is uncontrolled observation. And when the observation takes place according to definite pre-arranged plans, then we call it controlled observation. Coming to the interview method. So what are the types of interview? We have structured interview with predetermined questions, unstructured interviews which have the flexibility of approach. We have focused interviews, clinical interviews, and non-directive interviews. In non-directive interviews, we actually encourage the respondent to talk about the given topic with minimal direct questioning. Coming to the questionnaire method of primary data collection. So basically here the questionnaires are handed out, it's filled up, then the questionnaires are collected, analyzed, and reported. Questions can be multiple choice questions or closed questions. And then we have the open-ended questions. Open-ended questions actually are designed to permit a free response from the respondent and give the respondent considerable latitude in phrasing a reply. An effective questionnaire should be short, simple, and lucid. There should be a logical sequence. Open-ended questions are best avoided in a questionnaires because they would be difficult to analyze. So it's better to give dichotomous questions or MCQs. Control questions to indicate the reliability of the respondent, and provision for indications of uncertainty like no preference, etc. And there should be brief directions with regard to filling up the questionnaire. And finally, we come to the schedule method of data collection. So it is similar to the questionnaire method, but then we have an enumerator who is specially appointed to fill the schedules. Therefore, it is expensive, but the rate of non-response is much lower. The identity of the respondent would be known, but it's a faster method and it narrows the sample as well. Now coming to secondary data is something which has already been collected by others. Journals, periodicals, research publication, official records, etc. It may be available in the published or unpublished form, resorted to when primary data sources or methods are not feasible or inaccessible. Secondary data definitely is quick and cheaper. We can encompass a wider geographical area with a longer orientation period, but it is not fulfilling to the specific needs of the research, and accuracy is poor and not up to the date. Now, getting your data ready. If you're dealing with a very large volume of data, you can actually assign a unique identifier to all the data that you're collecting. You should organize and keep all the forms, questionnaires, interviews with you. Check for completeness and accuracy, and remove those that are incomplete and do not make sense. Recording data, obviously computerized or paper-based. Computerized is faster data availability. Analysis is much easier using computerized data. But of course, you would need the hardware and software backup, cloud support. Paper-based, you can administer to all strata of society, but then definitely it's a longer data collection period, and it can be biased. The results can be biased also. Now, storing data. Commonly used, there are many platforms where you can store data. Commonly, we do use the Excel spreadsheet. We use Microsoft Access for database management, quantitative analysis using software like SPSS, and qualitative analysis like APInfo, InVivo, etc. So with that, I come to the end of my talk, and I will now hand over the mic to Dr. Sunil Morekar, who will be speaking on solving the puzzle, statistical tools, and data analysis. So, as Sergey